My name is John Garancheski. I'm from Tattooed Heart Studios. I've owned the studio since 2005. I have some tax experience with business. We also asked you guys if you had any questions. We're here to talk about taxes with our tax expert, Kevin McCormally.
Hey, John. I'm Kevin McCormally. I'm a retired journalist, and I spent about 40 years writing about taxes, answering people's questions on television and radio about taxes. I'm not an attorney. I'm not an accountant. But I spent 40 years talking to the smartest attorneys and accountants in the country, trying to get answers to questions like yours. John?
Awesome. I think that you not being an accountant is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because you have a journalistic mind, so you more likely to see things from different angles.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I think that's true. I mean, I'm not in a box like an accountant but I mean, I don't want to put down lawyers and accountants because they've just helped me enormously over the years.
Sure. All right, so I guess we'll just jump right into it. The first one here is something that comes up a lot in the industry. What are the pros and the cons of being a 1099 contractor and being an employee for a studio?
Okay, first on the pros of being an employee is you've got a steady income. You know what you're going to make. You're probably going to get some great fringe benefits from your boss: medical insurance, maybe sick leave, paid vacation. You don't have to mess with all the accounting of supplies and deductions and all the. Being an employee is pretty simple. You pick up your paycheck and you're pretty much done. Independent contractor is more complicated, but can be much more valuable too, because suddenly, you don't have those benefits. You've got to pay for your own health insurance. You've got to, if you want a vacation, you can take whenever you want, but nobody's going to pay you for it. But on the other hand, you've got all these deductions that you can offset your income with. And that's when it comes to taxes, the most important thing is to keep track of all those expenses so you don't end up paying tax on money that you don't really have. The key thing with independent contractor, you have control of yourself. I mean, that's what the IRS looks at. When they try to decide employee versus independent contractor, it really comes down to control. If you control your own hours, if you decide when you're going to work. Another key thing about independent contractors, if you have an opportunity to lose money, if there's no guarantee you're going to have a profit at the end of the day, you're probably an independent contractor. On the other hand, if your boss tells you work from 9 to 5, and your boss tells you when your vacation is and controls all these things and tells you exactly what you're going to be paid, you're probably an employee. It's not something for you to decide. I mean, you can choose not to be an employee, but if you're working for a place that treats you as an employee, that's what IRS is going to think you are.
Sure. I know that there's a lot of kind of conversation and conflict even in the industry about possible misclassifications of workers in terms of like how much control they have, or what actually does make an employee versus a 1099. So if you're using all the supplies at the studio and you're going to the same place every day, maybe you still make your own schedule. Do you fall on one side or the other?
Not necessarily, John. That's kind of gray area. And you got to realize the reason the IRS is so concerned about this is really comes down to the self-employment tax.
Okay.
Because if you're an employee, your boss has to withhold Social Security tax from you, make sure it gets paid. Both the boss's share has to pay half of it, you pay the other half, but that's withheld from your income. If you're an independent contractor, it's up to you to make sure that gets paid. And this is what scares the IRS. They like to have that control. And so this is where the misclassification issue often comes up. In fact, there are a lot of cases where employees who are being treated as independent contractors have gone to the IRS, and they got a special form for this, to turn in your boss and saying, John's treating me as an independent contractor, but he controls this, this, and this. He ought to be paying half of my Social Security tax. The IRS spends a lot of their time looking into cases like that. So again, a lot of gray area. If the independent contractor doesn't mind being an independent contractor, probably no harm, no foul, nobody cares. But if the studio wants to treat somebody as an independent contractor, really they control too much, I mean, the independent contractor can complain. But again, the key thing is that self-employment tax. That's what the IRS is worried about.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is a lot of it comes down to how much control one party has in the situation. So if the control is more on the studio or the business owner's side, then it's maybe more likely. And again, it's a gray area.
Right, and you got to remember that an artist can be both an employee and independent contractor. I mean, independent contractor usually means somebody's paying them, but you can have a job as an employee and you can set up a studio at home. and work on the weekends. I mean, as long as there's no problem with your boss having your clients outside of the studio, but you can be employed and have your own studio where you suddenly are self-employed yourself. You have to worry about your own Social Security and taxes, and you have to worry about all those deductions, but you can be both.
Okay. So if you're an employee at a studio, kind of going along with that, but you go off and you do independent conventions, maybe that your employer is not paying for, but they're fine with you going and doing guest spots at other studios, conventions at other studios. And so you're collecting your own money when you go out and do these, and you're charging. Would that be an example?
Playing both sides of the street then. You're self-employed. And so again, when you go off to those guest spots, you've got to pay your own way, but those travel expenses are deductible. So I mean, that's where you have to really start keeping separate sets of books. Not one set for you and one set for the IRS, but I mean, you need to keep all these books. You have to keep all of these records. And again, if your employer is fine with you doing that, then that's great. Great thing about traveling is if you're away from home overnight, it's sort of like magic. All the expenses, like for food and for lodging, that aren't deductible when you're at home. You're away from home overnight on business, a legitimate business trip, all that's deductible.